A 19-year-old college student vanishes into the night. His last words? A panic scream, then silence. Despite massive searches, not a single trace of him was ever found. What started as a routine drive home became one of the most chilling unsolved disappearances in recent history. So, what really happened to Brendan Swanson? Back on May 13th, 2008, a 19-year-old Brendan Swanson was attending one of the end-of-the-semester spring parties that were being held that night. Brendan lived in a small town of Marshall in Minnesota, US, and he was this regular, smart and friendly guy. He was just after enrolling in studying wind turbines at the community college out in Canby, and on the night of May 13, he and his friends were celebrating the end of the semester because that was the tradition, and there were actually several parties happening all around Canby. Now, these parties were nothing crazy. It was mainly just people hanging out, listening to music, and having a few beers, catching up with their mates. And Brendan actually planned on attending 2 parties that night, so he kept drinking to a minimum because he knew that he still had to drive home. And so after Brendan attended his first party nearby the town of Lind, which was about 7 miles away from his hometown of Marshall, he said goodbye to everyone and apologized for leaving so early, hopped into his car and started driving towards Canby to meet another friend. Then, at around midnight, Brendan decided that he was now done partying because he was getting pretty tired, and so he wanted to go back home. So he headed out and began his 30-mile drive back to his folks' place in Marshall. Now, Brendan was actually really familiar with this particular drive because he drove this route every day on his way to college. But since Brendan did have a few beers, he decided to be a little more cautious, and instead of the highway, he took the back roads. And so Brendan was driving towards his home, but around 2 a.m. his car ended up in a ditch. He wasn't hurt or anything, but he still got stuck, and it seemed that he couldn't get out of there by himself. So he tried calling a few of his friends to see if anyone could drive over to him and give him a hand, but nobody was really picking up. Now, you gotta remember that all of his friends were probably still out partying, or they were passed out by now, and so it wasn't really surprising that nobody was really answering him. So, what did he do next? He decided to call his parents. He did feel a little embarrassed about that, but he immediately explained that he wasn't in any danger and he just got stuck and asked if they could drive over to help him. At that point, Brendan either wanted to get his car back on the road or just get home, and he would call a tow truck tomorrow and deal with the whole situation then. His parents said, of course, that he would drive out to him right away, and they asked him where he currently was, to which Brendan said that he was sure that he was somewhere in between Marshall and Lind, so about 25 miles away. And so his mom Annette and dad Brian hopped into their truck and started driving out to him. And right there is where things start to get weird. Brendan's parents kept their son on the phone the whole time so that they could try to find each other that way. And when they got to the spot Brendan said he likely was at, there was no sign of him. So Brendan started flashing his headlights and his folks did the same, but neither could see the other. At that point, Brendan was getting really frustrated, and so he started honking his horn as well. But all Annette and Brian could hear was silence, like they were in these 2 very different worlds. Eventually, Brendan said that he was giving up, that they were obviously in the wrong place. And so tired and frustrated, he started walking towards what he believed were the lights from the town Lind that he could see clearly in the distance. And again, this whole time the trio were on the phone, communicating, and so Annette and Brian started their own car up and began driving towards one of the bars in Lind, as that is where they said they would meet up. For the next 47 minutes, Brendan stayed on the phone with his parents, and they could hear that he was making his way through some rough terrain and he was going along some streams of water. But then something very unsettling happened. As Brendan is casually talking, completely out of nowhere, he yells, "Oh shit!" and his phone went dead. Annette and Brian were stunned by this, like what had just happened. They had no idea, and so Brian immediately tried calling Brendan back, but he was not answering. He would try 6 times, but there was nothing. They spent the next while driving up and down the roads, but they were not finding their son or his car anywhere, and so frustrated and extremely worried, they had to turn around and drive home. The first thing in the following morning, around 6:30 a.m., Annette and Brian drove out to the police station and reported Brendan missing. But they did not get the answer or support that they were hoping for. The cops kind of brushed the whole situation off. They said that it wasn't unusual for college kids to disappear for the night, and one even told his mom that Brendan had the right to be missing. I mean, can you believe that? Unfortunately, later that day, things would not improve. The police managed to obtain Brandon's cell phone records, and this brought them the first chilling clue. It turned out that Brandon wasn't near Lind at all. His cell signal actually pinged off a tower near a place called Porter, which was 25 miles in the opposite direction. So that meant that Brandon likely got lost while trying to navigate the back roads, and somehow ended up driving away from where he was supposed to be going. A search was called in immediately, and once the investigators moved over to the correct area, they quickly found Brandon's car near Taunton on Highway 68. It was still stuck in that ditch off a gravel road, but it didn't look like it was damaged at all. The wheels were just stuck on one side of the car, whereas the other side was just lifted off the ground. But when the investigators started looking around for any potential clues as to where Brandon might have gone off to, they found nothing. There was a lot of gravel and grass, and so Brandon left no footprints, meaning they didn't have anything tangible to go on. But Brandon's cell had been routed through another tower, and so thinking that was likely where he had gone after leaving his car behind, they zoned in onto that. Dogs, drones, horses, even boats were deployed so they could come through the area. Even the Yellow Medicine River was being searched since it was in the vicinity, but the truth was that they thought that maybe Brandon fell in and drowned. Remember, his parents were on the phone to him the whole time he was walking, and they could also hear some water in the background, so this was entirely possible. On the morning of Brandon's disappearance, some of the water in the county was still as much as 3 meters deep, and if there was strong current, this could have swept Brandon away. One set of bloodhounds actually managed to track his scent for a while, leading them through fields and up to the river. But then very strangely, when the dog got across the water and out on the other side, the trail did not just stop, it kept going. But the investigators found the grassy terrain and heavy rain to be really hindering them. The sand had been spread out too much at that point, and so in the end this did not lead them to any specific location. And even Brandon's parents did not think that he had drowned. His mom said that if the dogs tracked him that far, he must have made it across. And his dad added that Brandon didn't sound drunk or confused at all while they were on the phone with him. The next they mentioned were those lights that Brandon was apparently going towards to. We now know that they were not lights from Lind, but investigators proposed that they could have been actually coming from the nearby grain elevator, which did have a red light on at night. But again, this is not confirmed, and many believe that Brandon was going towards much brighter lights, because just one red light would probably not make him think that it was coming from town. So what were those lights, and where they were coming from? After the initial search was bringing nothing, most efforts were called off, but one sheriff continued to walk the banks of the river for the next 30 days, hoping he would finally find something useful. But unfortunately, that never happened. The Swansons, completely heartbroken by the fact that Brandon seemed to have just vanished in a split second, went on to leave their porch light on every night, hoping their son would come back one day. Another set of searches resumed after the fall, just after the fields had been harvested. And surprisingly, dogs continued to follow human remain scents into the area of northwest of Porter, which had not been searched before. But again, nothing new turned up. In spring the following year, just after the snow had melted, another search was started, and this cycle continued on until 2011. And by that point, over 320 square kilometers had been searched, but the police were still not finding anything new. There was no body, there were no clothes, there was nothing. What is interesting to note is some details added by the searchers and the police. They said that the process was really frustrating because they could not just search any land they wanted. They had to protect the landowner's property, and so generally they avoided searching fields that had crops in them, even though they admitted that it was likely where Brandon might have ended up. And it was for this reason their searches were mainly confined to spring and fall because of the harvest times. But this left them with yet another issue, the bad weather. This really slowed the whole work because of how difficult it was to just walk around in the muddy terrain. Even though the dogs were pointing at human remains being somewhere in the vicinity, that could have been due to many factors. The area is known for strong winds, so that could have brought the smell over and put them into so-called scent pools, which is where the wind breaks, and that is usually around farmstead and tall grass and other ditches and creeks, which there were plenty of around. There was the possibility that the body could have been moved since or scattered around. Additionally, predators such as coyotes and even raccoons could have scattered the remains also. And let's not forget about the fact that those fields were actively harvested, so if any remains were in the area, they could have also been scattered by the heavy machinery. And then there were the cows. The search dogs are trained to be around other animals, but the investigators still avoid walking near cows, especially if it's during the calving season, because that is when the cows are on much higher alert. All of this meant that many of the farms in the area, because it just left the investigators with no window in where they were able to do it. Of course, there was the possibility that Brandon might have gone on to take shelter from the wind or rain and crawled into one of the outbuildings or under some old machinery and pass away there. Now, of course, by now it would be just skeleton remaining, but even the bones would be obvious to the naked eye, and so there is still the hope that someone will report these if they ever see them. In 2010, a tip line was established, and by 2015, 90 leads were called in. But again, none of this brought any new information in, and so Brandon still remained missing. Now, if you're wondering if something good came out of all this, then yes, it did. Brandon's parents fought really hard to change the laws in Minnesota. Back then, the police didn't have to take a missing adult seriously, unless it looked like a foul play. So the Swansons pushed for what they called the Brandon's Law, and it made it so that if someone goes missing, no matter their age, the police have to start looking right away. There is now no more waiting around, assuming the person just wandered off. And also, they cannot not take a report, even if they assume that the person might have gone missing voluntarily. In addition to that, the station where the report is taken has to notify other nearby law enforcement agencies, which means that even more people become aware of the situation and can help. The law passed in 2009, and now some other states have followed suit, and lives are continuing to be safe that way. But it still does not change the fact that even to this day, we have still no idea what really happened to Brandon. It is possible that he slipped into the river, but then tracks were found on the other side, meaning he likely did not get drowned, just like his parents believe. It is also entirely possible that there was someone else involved, someone that was waiting out there in the dark. If Brandon didn't see his attacker coming, it is possible that he could have been abducted without leaving any obvious marks on the spot. Or maybe, just maybe, he made it further than we think, and something entirely else happened that we'll never understand. And what about those lights? Could they have been involved in his mysterious disappearance as well? Even though to this day we still have no idea what actually happened to Brandon that night, his family and friends still believe that one day he will come home. Brian Swanson has since passed away, but I have no doubt that Brandon's mom still has not lost hope that Brandon one day will return to her, or at least that she could get the closure one way or another, and I really hope that she does. This is one of the most baffling mysteries out there, and honestly, not knowing where Brandon is must be so difficult on anyone that knows him, especially his family. This is really the part that sticks with you. So if you ever find yourself driving down Highway 68, just keep your eyes open. You never know. Now also, if you could, please share this video with at least one person so that Brandon's story may live on. Until next time.